Hello, today we're talking with Seth Rubenstein from the Pew Research Center. He graciously agreed to come on the show and talk about the Interactivity API, among other things that they're doing to make the editing experience on their WordPress installation so much better. Seth, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, tell me a little bit, just out of curiosity, how long have you been in the WordPress space? How did you get into the WordPress space? Because I see you're a contributor as well, right?
I am, yeah. I've been in the WordPress space for a long time now, probably 20 years-ish. As long as WordPress has been around, I've been using it in some form or fashion. I joined Pew Research Center about 8, 9 years ago to kind of wrangle all of their WordPress sites into something more cohesive. And a couple years ago, we started playing around with Gutenberg, and here we are.
Wow. Well, you've been in it a long time, and
hmm
so you've seen the whole transition of what it used to be to what it's becoming now, which is, I think, amazing what it's become. I
Yeah.
did not join the WordPress space until maybe 2018, I think. I was mostly doing other types of web applications and then stumbled upon it. And Elementor was sort of big at the time and started playing around with that. And that was great, but still it wasn't native, right? It wasn't core. And
Right.
so when I started hearing about all the fun stuff that was going on with Gutenberg, I got really excited. But I don't know if it's just me. Many other people might have the same, I don't know, might have had the same thought that the Gutenberg started coming out. There was a lot of, I don't know if bad press about it. I just think it was people complaining, like they complain about everything. And if you're
Yeah, that's a lot of
outside,
it.
right? If you're outside, then it sounds like, oh, maybe they have a point. Maybe it's not
Yeah.
good. And so I really didn't try it. So the fact that you guys have been like doing this big jump from 2 years back in such a big project is great because it's such a mind opening way of doing things once you figure out how it works,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And so, yeah. So the reason I reached out was that I was seeing some of the posts that you were putting on Twitter and some of the facets based stuff that you were doing and using Interactivity API, which I'd love to dive into if we have a chance, and things like that. And I think this the idea of the call was to see if we could shed some light for other people to see what's possible and see that it's not so complicated as it's made out to be by some, and just show the sheer power of what modern WordPress can be without needing to sort of stretch out for a third party builder. If that makes sense.
Sure. Absolutely. I'm happy to dive in. I think Facets is probably a great example of kind of the interactivity API. I think at kind of a scale. Can I share my screen, actually?
Yeah.
Let me do that, and I can walk you through a little bit how this works.
Yes, I'd love to
Um,
see that.
this looks correct. Here we go. Okay, so
Perfect.
I guess just a little bit of background. We were coming from a 12-site WordPress multi-site a couple years back. And if you saw my tweet from a couple years ago, I think when I kind of started advocating out there for Gutenberg and showing what's possible, because as you said, there is some bad press. There are people I think out there that are diehard old school WordPress people, and they're upset they have to learn JavaScript now. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a big point of kind of conflict. So I just wanted to show what was possible when you could go all in. And
Mm-hmm.
we've done things like the quiz builder, chart builder, et cetera, et cetera. We wanted to go a little bit further and go all into full site editing. So a couple weeks ago, we launched a new website, fully collapsed on multi-site, now down to one site, which is great for us managing it, but also for managing the design and templates and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at the homepage.
Okay.
Let me just real quick open up another browser window, and I will log in.
When
And
just to get this clear, while you do that, you were in a multi-site environment and now it's no longer multi-site, or
It's still
is it?
multi-site, but it's one site on the multi-site with some other
Okay.
smaller
Okay.
subsites for for internal stuff. But
Nice.
okay, so let me refresh. Should be logged in. So we do a few things in our WordPress installation to make things a little bit easier on editors and stuff. One of those things you'll see is that we customize the admin bar pretty heavily. So we kind of give context around, hey, you're looking at something. Do you want to edit the template or the content? So, anyways, here we're in full site editing now. We're in the site editor.
Okay, cool.
So this is the full site. We've had to create kind of a lot of blocks to support that. So one of them is kind of, we have a content type called homepage that lets you schedule out tomorrow's homepage or next week's homepage or whatever.
Oh,
and so
that's
this block
interesting.
pulls in the content for that, whatever the most recently published homepage is, pulls that content in on the homepage template.
Interesting.
So it's a way for us to kind of editorialize templates. But of course, the real star of this show is facets and the Interactivity API. So there's kind of a lot of things at play here. This requires kind of a couple different blocks. And I don't want to scare people away because this is a complex system at play, but that doesn't mean the Interactivity API is necessarily complex to begin with. So to break it down, what we have is a block called Facets Context Provider. What this does is when you hit any of these archive pages that has this block, it queries our Facets API. In this case, we're using Facet WP to handle a lot of the facets right now. And we get that facet information back. And that feeds that information through block context down to any of the blocks inside of here. So, for example, core query, public or kind of core query block here, it passes down. These are the post IDs that you should be returning from the faceted selections. And then in our facet templates themselves, just open this up. This is it tells our facet template block, here are the facets that you have available to you, topics, this taxonomy, this date, yada, yada, yada. And then the user, our editors, our designers can create templates for those facets. So, they would select, let me go to clicking around a lot. They would come in here and drop in one of our facet template blocks. There are no facets found because we've filled them all up. But that's how that kind of information works. So the higher up block provides all the information to the editor about what options you have available to make templates. And then on the front end, that renders out those options. So let me show you what that looks like. And then the other thing, of course, is all of these blocks are interactive. So you'll see here we've kind of made a suite of form input blocks. Here we have form input checkbox. We have form input select, which is just a select drop down. We have I think this one's just select boxes and text boxes. We also have password box, text area, etc., etc. And for us, for our implementation of the Interactivity API, what's central is this attribute that we extend to all interactive blocks by a filter. You'll see here, probably you notice this little panel, Interactivity API. This is a custom panel we put on any block that has interactivity. And it does two things. One, you get a toggle. So, yeah, this is interactive, great. And then two, a namespace. So what this does is it lets you drop in, say, a checkbox block. The checkbox block by itself does nothing. You can style it, you can pick its font size and maybe what the checkbox color is and all this sort of visual stuff. But you click on it, it does nothing. That's just like an HTML checkbox element. When you put it into another block, for example, facet template, and give it a namespace of the facet template tells the checkbox block, hey, when you click on something, this is what you should be doing. So in this way, what we are creating is a components library, effectively, out of blocks. So we have a bunch of these kind of primitive sub-blocks. They can be plugged into other higher-level interactive blocks, and then those do things. So let's take a look.
For those who have no idea about facets and searching, could you just do a brief explanation of what facets are and why someone would use something like facets WP? High level, like completely high level. Just
Sure. Facets are complicated, both computationally, they're expensive, and kind of querying all the stuff you want is hard, and creating interfaces for them is difficult too. So what facets are is you'll see here on the right-hand side. This is our blog home template. This is just the home template, right? A listing of all the posts. For us, we have a bunch of different custom post types, and like I showed you, we have a variation of core query that will pull in multiple post types at once. And then our facets let users drill down onto the 16,000 posts just right here that we have. So maybe you want to find something from the last 6 months. That's a report. And you'll see here that these things are kind of live updating as we go. And maybe it's about the United States. And lastly, it's in our kind of economy work. And so you saw there, all of that was updating in real time. No page is being reloaded. And the counts on the right are being updated in real time too. You will see we do have a few little bugs here.
Yes.
This is all,
well, but that's
very experimental, brand new. So we're figuring out some issues with facets and kind of selections and stuff. So the way that this works is, let me reload the page. Each of these kind of facet templates has and you probably see it here in the markup, I think, a WP router region. If you're unfamiliar with it, the Interactivity API also ships with this interactivity router functionality. And that comes with two functions you can use, prefetch and navigate. And so by setting a router region on markup using the Interactivity API, what that says is it signals when you use navigate or prefetch, if there's a difference in the markup here, re-render it. What this lets you do is make single-page JavaScript apps, basically, out of blocks. So each of these facet templates basically will re-render when there's new data. So, if I pick past month, and if the format's facet template has new data that it's fetched from the background, then it will re-render here without having to reload the page. And this is how we update the counts live as you select them. It's also the reason why we also have a little bit of a kind of a race condition bug here where you select something and one of the other things thinks it's selected, but we'll figure that out.
You're using the bleeding edge anyway, so it's to be expected. But it works great, and it's fast. It's performant.
It's very fast. It's very fast.
And it's very clean.
Yeah, the added bonus to this on performance, of course, is if you're only re-rendering what's changed, then when we select new results here, we're not re-rendering the whole page to get a new page of results. We're only re-rendering what we needed, and we're only on the server side rendering on server side what has changed. So across the board, you're using less server resources as you hit these facets, minus the initial calculation, obviously, on the facets.
Of course,
it's a very complex database and caching strategy to keep those in check. So that's how that works. I mean, so each of these is a block. Each of these values is an individual block. The way that works, I showed you in the site editor, is you kind of set up your template, and then we say, oh, you dropped the checkbox block here. Well, we know we have 4 values for this template. Let's pop out 4 checkbox blocks with the correct values and stuff from our data. Same thing here for these radio and select and all that stuff. And then each of these have kind of a common set of handlers. Here, let me expand the markup a little bit and you'll see them. So for starters, see here, this is the form input checkbox block. And on it has a on-click handler. It's looking at the facets context provider in actions for the on checkbox click.
I'm sorry,
action.
I just see the zoomed in date range. Is it my screen?
Oh, that's weird. Why is it doing that? Let me stop and restart my screen sharing. That's weird.
That's fine.
The whole window. How about that? There we go.
Ah, yes. Now I see it. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Good.
So yeah, so this is an individual block that's being rendered server side based on all the data that the facets context provider is providing.
Okay.
We set up our template. We said this should be a checkbox, so it's outputting 4 checkboxes because of the value. And then on these, we have some kind of common handlers. So you'll see data WP on mouse enter. You'll see the target namespace attribute I mentioned earlier. That's what this is. So, if I wanted this to respond to something else, I would just change this out to, receive platform, MailChimp form. Maybe that's one of the things, right? And when I click on this, it's going to pull that functionality from the MailChimp form and not the facets context provider. And so this lets you kind of plug and play, this block now does this block now does that, based on how it's being used.
And that's why you created sort of this subset of very basic components that you can then just use generically for anything you want.
Yeah. The block itself is extraordinarily simple. It has a few color attributes and style attributes, and you can type in a label, and that's it. That's all it does. It's not until it has a interactivity target namespace that all of these little directives and click handlers do something.
What's the scope of the interactivity API? So let's say you have these right there, they're next to each other, right? But then you have some lower, and as I saw, these are all in this sort of sidebar that is just like a pattern, right? But they could also be anywhere on the page, right? So is the context the whole page, or is it just the content of the block?
So for this particular template, it's mostly the whole page. It's everything inside of this facets context provider block that's higher up. Actually, if we look for it, this block. So everything
it's
that's
above
in this block,
everything. Okay.
Yeah, so it doesn't, the masthead isn't in there and the footer is not in there.
Okay.
But everything that's in this block is aware, both on the server side, in each block it has block context for the blocks that opt into it, which are just the facet blocks. They're aware of its server side. And then, of course, in the interactivity API, the stuff in here is aware of its context. So one of the things I like to tell people is that kind of to think about the interactivity API is that the same way that you have block context in the editor, and people are aware of this, you can do uses context and provides context and pass an attribute down through blocks. The interactivity API kind of lets you do that with functionality and with data in a kind of similar fashion, different syntax and everything, but a similar fashion. So it kind of brings that idea from the editor and the server-side stuff into your client-side applications.
Okay, so that's why you have the facets provider that you mentioned earlier starting to make sense. So that facet provider is not really a block that does something specific layout-wise. It's just a container, just context provider. Like when you're doing a React application, you might wrap everything with an authentication provider, right? And so
right. Or you might make it an actual context for your React application with all of your logic and functions and stuff, and then you'd wrap your React application in that. The same thing's happening here. We're just making little interactivity API context providers effectively.
Okay. So So it could extend if you wanted to. It could extend further. It doesn't have to be just in the content within that. It could be the whole page. Like I imagine, I haven't gone deep into the demo for the the trailers demo for the movies.
Yeah, the movies one. Yeah.
Whether it has a little player.
Your theme. Your whole theme could be it could have an interactivity store, right? And so you could put all of that in there, and then everything would fall under that.
Could reach into. Okay, interesting. And so this one specifically, why did you choose in a project like this to go through the hassle, right, of creating your own facets UI? You're still using facets WP for some of the backend logic, but still all the UI stuff. Why go through that process instead of using a search plugin? Right? Why would someone go for that?
Well, for us, it it's what made sense project-wise, right? Like we knew. So I guess to back up a little bit, this is as impressive as I think people have found the new site and stuff to be and everything we're doing here. This is the start of our year. We have much bigger plans for the rest of the year, and one of those things is we build, as an organization, we're a news organization. We build a lot of kind of editorial interactive things, maps, databases, kind of scrolly telly editorial featurettes.
Okay.
We have developers that do that requires coding time. We want to do that all in the block editor. We want to get to a point where designers and editors are just building out those kind of interactive featurettes in the block editor and not having to code anything. To do that, you need some foundational technology, and a lot of the stuff that we have here for facets and throughout the site, you look at MailChimp forms, that's also using these form input blocks we've created in the Interactivity API. You look at a bunch of different areas on the site. Those kind of Interactivity API foundational things are research and development for us of how we're going to do those other things down the road. And so that's why we decided, this is actually a good, complex situation. We'll learn a lot from this. We are learning a lot from it. And it'll inform us on our plans for the remainder of the year.
Okay, that makes sense. Yes, and this is perfect because I think for editors, this is fantastic. Like you were saying, you want to do some interactive experiences or interactive courses or anything that just shows data in multiple places without having to give them a different, like, clunky interface to do something or have to them to repeat things. Okay, go ahead. I think you have something.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with our quiz builder and chart builder plugins.
No, I'm very interested to hear about them.
I can show you those. These are the next two big things of ours on the docket to get converted to the Interactivity API. They're the last two kind of big remaining things. Let me give you a demonstration of that.
Quizzes are a big one. Like a lot of
quizzes are a big one.
People want to have quizzes or polls on their site, and you always have to reach for a third-party tool that might not be exactly what you really need, right?
My first week at the center was stabilizing the site. It was just crashing under the weight of quizzes. There was a popular science quiz, and it was just taking down the site. So we spun up a quick gravity forms-based solution. We used that for years. We launched this 3 or 4 years ago now, kind of early on in Gutenberg. So one, let me show you the front end of a quiz. And then I'll show you the back end, and I think you'll kind of get an idea of how cool this idea of building interactive products in the editor can be. So I'm just going to pick these things. Don't read into any answers I'm giving people.
Of course.
I'm just randomly clicking stuff. This is by far our top product. Every single day it's the number one trafficked item. But it's all, we also have a lot of other quizzes. We do a number of them. So providing producers a way to quickly build those, quite frankly, allowing to bug me, was a lot of the impetus for building this. So
of course,
right now this isn't using the Interactivity API. Right now what you're seeing is actually kind of a very primitive concept for hydrating and rendering a kind of React-driven block application. I wish the Interactivity API existed 5 years ago when we built this. This is what I needed. Part of the problem is that the way that we're doing it, it's kind of rigid, right? Like the quiz the layout is the layout. With the Interactivity APIs I just showed you on the facets and stuff, you could drop those wherever. You can move these things wherever you want. So I'm actually really excited about getting this converted. So here we have the results page. This is a custom results page for this one quiz. We have some blocks for some other quizzes. But you saw the interface. Let me show you what it's like to make one of these. So in the back end, you'll see we have a pretty similar interface to what you're going to get on the front end. So editors can see kind of what it actually is going to be like for someone to take this quiz.
Oh, so it's like a quiz question is a block, basically.
That's right. Quiz question is a block and answer is a block. It's all blocks. I mean, if there's one thing I can tell people, it's all blocks. Whenever you encounter a roadblock, how do I do this? Build a block. How do I structure this page or this data for this application? Make it into blocks.
This is much better than like even LearnDash or whatever. I mean, you have this other interface that you have to learn and put things in and then see if it looks the same way in the front end. And so just having it here in the block editor, so much nicer.
So this is how we build quizzes. It's very visual. From a management perspective, from managing content, it's much more enjoyable and easier to kind of, hey, if there's a problem, you just click in and you change the text or whatever. You click here, you change the answer, whatever. That's so much easier than like a bunch of WP-CLI statements or like a settings page or something like that, right? The same for charts.
Charts are a big one.
We're a news organization. Our bread and butter is kind of infographics and charts. You look at any one of our posts, they're full of charts. So we also do a lot of interactive charts. Let me show you what that looks like. I'll actually open up one chart and then I'll show you kind of what that looks like in a whole product. So let's just see what would be a good chart. Sure, let's check this one out.
Are these?
Here we go.
Wow. Are these designed here? Oh, wow. So they're literally made in the block editor.
They are made in the block editor. So we use something other than Core Table because Core Table is a atrocious block. I'm sorry for anyone who's working on that. It needs a lot of work. So we use a table called Flexible Table. For what it's worth, we also have. We've also built a table based on the fantastic hands-on table React library. So this is something we're going to be using more. We also support this for our chart editor so that we can more easily work with tables. So wow. For what it's worth. Tables are important to us. So we use a block called Flexible Table Block for managing the data for this. And then as you update your data, you'll see here your charts get rendered in real time. And there is a enormous amount of configuration and color options and everything you could need for professional charting tool. This is all done in the block editor.
Wow.
And so for designers, you can imagine this is a pretty great tool. All of the design and brand guidelines and rules are programmed into this. You can't make a chart that looks bad. You can't make a chart that doesn't adhere to the brand guidelines. And I think that's one of the other powerful things of full site editing is that when done right, that's true of your entire site. You don't need to worry about like, oh, well, what is it? Maybe a producer is going to pick a wrong color or this or that or the other thing. No, they're not. So the other cool thing about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Let me pull up this other page. Go ahead and ask
You're really giving all the tools that editors need just to them directly in these. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, because this is a publication that has all of these items, right? You have quizzes, you have charts, you have tables, which is data that typically, if you're building like a journal website or anything like that, it's very complex because you have to decide, do I need a graphic designer to build these and then upload them as images? No, really, I want them to be selectable. So do I need charting software? Which charting software will it mess up my performance? So having it here, being able to create it inside is great. Yeah. I think it's eye-opening for people to see what's possible if you build something like this.
Yeah. For every naysayer out there about Gutenberg, I kind of try to run through this whole litany of things that we've built. Look, at the end of the day, what Gutenberg has provided you is your very own customizable Figma, except it's attached to the world's most powerful content management system. That's kind of incredible. So there are things to complain about, sure, but like the level of customization, what you can do here is just unheard of.
Yes.
So yeah, here's a page with multiple charts in it. We use if people have not explored, I also recommend people explore the WordPress entity system. This lets you kind of quickly pull in stuff from the REST API and edit things. So we have a component that we use that handles this. So you'll see here, I showed you a chart. A chart lives in a single post type.
Okay.
Makes it easy to reference in multiple posts. Here, I'm pulling in multiple charts into this post. And so just like when you're dealing with template parts or reusable blocks, when you use the entity system in this way, you also get the added benefit of, hey, when I go to save this fact sheet, it's going to let me know. I have a bunch of other posts that I'm referencing. Do you really want to update that? And that's all just kind of built-in functionality from entities.
Oh, wow.
The other reason to use entities is you will gain WordPress sync functionality. So another big part of this project for us, which I really can't show you right now, every single thing we've built was built with entities in mind, meaning that when phase 3 does come online and we get real-time collaboration, we're good to go. All of our blocks are ready to be used by multiple people at once, and it's actually really cool to see when people are doing it. We've had a few kind of internal beta tests.
Wow.
We're obviously waiting for the full thing to come, but so
how do these connect? Like, if you have this table and this chart, are they? Because you mentioned some of them will have interactivity API, some not yet. How to show it here? Is it just constantly pulling through the REST API, or is it just client based while you see it and then it saves it?
Yeah, it's not constantly, but there's kind of like a heartbeat check. You know, it's looking for is there an update to send? The fetch is once, and then once there's new data, it would update that.
Nice.
Yeah, so this and the quiz builder that I just showed, those are kind of our next big things to get onto the interactivity API. One of the things I'm excited about that is the kind of idea that we can server-side render a lot of this stuff. We are experimenting with, right now these charts are SVGs. We use a backend or framework called Visix for this, but there's a possibility that we can render these SVGs server-side and then just add the interactivity on top, so that, once again, page performance, boom, it just loads, it just loads. There's nothing blocking it once the page is loaded. So that's the big thing, I think, that you really gain with when you go deep into the blocks, is you can do a lot of the server-side stuff that you weren't really able to do before, or at least not easily.
When you're working with the interactivity API, for example, and you're getting stuff back, are you getting full markup back already rendered, or is it rendering it on the client side based on like JSON data coming back?
It depends on what you're using, right? So the facets, that's rendering server-side. Or at least the markup is changing server-side. The interactivity API is reading the diff, and then if there is, rendering out the diff. We do have other applications where we're not doing the server-side stuff, where we're doing a lot of that calculation client-side, and then obviously in that case, we kind of have like, well, actually, to give you an idea, these checkboxes and radio inputs are rendering server-side. For the select box, this is all rendering client-side. So you set up a template with the interactivity API, and you say, you know, here's my list, and each item should have this value, whatever. And then in this case, for this item, the interactivity API is rendering this all client-side.
Oh, okay. So you can do both.
You can do both. Yeah, depends on what your needs are. So it's very flexible.
Oh, wow. This is very impressive. It seems there are some very simple things that WordPress has added that are very advanced behind the scenes, but at the end of the day, they seem simple. Like yesterday, I was working with the block bindings API, custom sources. Great. Custom sources. I didn't know that existed until I read the full article. I was like, what? And so you can do so much. And like you were saying earlier, the fact that an editor can now just go in and grab a bunch of things and design a full flow just using blocks and already pulling from everywhere is
The block
building
binding
something
stuff
like
is
this.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so easy to get started with. Just, I mean, so we had built a whole suite of blocks to display staff people and their photo and their job title and this and that and the other thing. And
Yeah.
in 2 hours, I read the block bindings API, deleted 10 blocks. And
Yeah.
so now when you come down to like, these are all block bindings. This is just a core paragraph block bound to our staff API. This is just a core image bound to our staff API. You click on one of these on this template, block binding, block binding, block binding, block binding, block binding. It's great. That's 5 blocks I don't have to manage. I just
Yeah.
have to manage a function that returns the data. So
Two
block binding is very
questions.
cool.
Yeah, they are amazing. Here, for example, or in the previous one, you have multiple authors, right? And so you're using block bindings, but you're showing multiple authors. So do you have like a block that, okay. I'm curious, like, because
I do.
sometimes you do the binding for the paragraph and then the image, but are you doing like a pattern with the 2 bindings?
Well, you know how that goes
Yeah.
with the block
Yeah,
recovery.
of
Let's do
course.
this. Let's say mini bio. So the way that this is working is, no surprise here. Once again, we have yet another kind of context provider. In this case, it's our bylines query block. This queries the current post for the bylines taxonomy, and then renders out each term with this template that you've created. And so
With block bindings inside.
with the block bindings inside, that's right. And so down here, if I come to, you'll see the template for this case is like this image. We just pass what value to fetch. We want the photo. And the block provides the ID to the block binding function, and then that just says, oh, go get, the name and photo for this staff person and that staff person.
Oh, that's so neat. Do you do for attachments, for example? That's another thing that always blows my mind. I saw you had attachments there, but then you also have an attachments page. You obviously, from what I've seen, you obviously don't have people uploading attachments multiple times. Probably just put it there and then have access to them. How does that work?
This was a little tricky with the site editor because it's just not where it needs to be with support for this. There is an attachment template in the site editor. So the way that this page works is, I think most people probably turn off attachment links. We've kind of historically used them. They're good SEO references for us, and they're just good to have a link directly to a chart. So we do use attachment pages. And then in our attachment template, what we've done is in core post content, we have a little filter that runs, and it says, is this the attachment page? If so, don't return content, return an image. That's something we're probably actually going to commit back to the Gutenberg project because it's kind of annoying, and I prefer that to be in core. It's what it needs to be. Maybe block bindings will resolve this because, potentially you could just drop an image block and bind it to the attachment ID. I don't know. We'll see. And then we have a custom block called attachment info. This grabs all the attachments associated with the parent post. In this case, teens in video games today. It just grabs the parent ID for the attachment and says, go get all the other attachments, which there are a lot for this post.
Oh yeah. So are these places where this appears, or are they? How are these the attachment info? How are these related to the attachment?
Oh, they're really related to the post. So
Post,
this is just
okay.
one attachment for this post. This is going to show us all of the images attachments for this whole post. We also have this concept of multi-section posts. So you'll see we have one here, and then we have a couple other child posts, and their attachments also get rolled up in that.
Nice. And I imagine for that table of contents that you were doing there, the table of content is probably very interesting too. You're not using the table of contents block, evidently.
No, we are not using the normal table of content. Like, we do have our own kind of data structure for posts and stuff, and so we call this a post report package, where we have a main post, and then you have child posts for kind of ancillary information, and we build out a pagination based on that information. And this is not the normal one. So yeah, this is a custom block. It also is using the Interactivity API in maybe a surprising way. So we have a table contents block here. It's wrapped in a group block that's sticky, which is obviously great. We also have hidden, which you can't see right now, a table contents block right here that will activate when the screen size gets to a specific width. This is using the WP on window resize handler and the Interactivity API to measure window width, and you set a threshold on the block of when you want this to activate, and it activates at that time. And so that's a simple Interactivity API directive, and then clicking it just adds a class, is open or is selected, something like that. Also, simple Interactivity API. So
neat.
Once again, wherever you see something that you're clicking on and it's doing something, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be the Interactivity API on our site right now.
Wow. Well, in that case,
and by the end of the year, it'll be 10 out of 10.
Wow, that's amazing. So I'm glad I reached out about the Interactivity API specifically. I think these are outstanding examples of it being used. I feel we're still missing a very clear and concise tutorial of how to use the Interactivity API in multiple scenarios. They're great. There's some great write-ups, but I don't know. I think still for many people, it's one of those things where you're like, I want to try it, but it doesn't click. It's like, oh, where do I start with something that's basic, but not too basic? You know how some of those examples are just too basic, and so it doesn't give you the context that you need to really understand it.
Well, hopefully I can offer something there soon. I am working on a blog post for the WordPress dev blog that'll go into a little bit of what I've just shown you and maybe a little bit more in-depth code examples on how you can get started with the Interactivity API, kind of at what we're calling it atomic blocks, taking kind of the idea of atomic design, as you saw, down to blocks, right? You know, these small primitive blocks or that kind of you put them together, they make an organism, they do something. So we'll have more to share on that soon, and hopefully somewhat of a tutorial for people.
Nice. Well, I really appreciate your time, Seth. This was very helpful. I think it'll help a lot of people to see what's possible, both within the Gutenberg system and also specifically with the Interactivity API. And I'm very looking forward to your write-up on that as well. I think we're going to learn quite a bit there. I hope we can speak again sometime soon and talk about some other very interesting stuff that you're up to.
Absolutely.
All
Thank
right.
you for having me.
It is my pleasure.